You're listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by A Boarding Company. I'm your host, MacNaught. Thanks for checking us out. Today's episode is going to be a fun one because I have a really fun guest that I can't wait for you guys to talk to. Richard Duncan from Australia is joining the show. So we're just going to get into it. We're going to talk the quirks of Australian logistics. We're going to talk about COVID and how that really hit the island or country. I forget what you go with. I can't wait for Richard to tell me how I'm a dumb American because I definitely am. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about the innovation in the supply chain that Australia is really going for. So without further ado, Richard, how's it going?
Hey Carl, thanks for having me. It's really good, thanks. Pretty busy over here in Australia, dealing with COVID and obviously all the effects that come with it. We're coping. We're in a second lockdown, unfortunately, in Victoria State. We haven't been pulling our weight and doing the right thing. So yeah, we're back in lockdown, unfortunately.
Then you're in good company.
We'll get through it.
Yeah, you're in good company because that's all we've been. I'm in Massachusetts too. We're like the better of the states in the U.S. and we're still great. Anyways, for the audience, tell them a little bit about yourself. Especially you have such a fascinating career in the supply chain. What have you been doing into it? What's been your experience?
I'm actually a Kiwi, so New Zealander. So I shipped over here in around about 2000. I actually started life in agribusiness of all places, being a kid from a farm in rural New Zealand. So started life in the sales and marketing role, but first came into logistics when I came back from Europe from a gap year and came to Australia. I joined one of the biggest logistics companies in Australia called Main Logistics, unfortunately no longer in business. But that's where I kind of got the bug for it. I joined as a financial analyst, so on the number side of the house, which was really good. But I really liked the industry and the type of people who are in it. It was a good mix of corporate, professional, and blue collar, grassroots kind of people as well. So I really like the process and optimization side of logistics, and there was a tangible product flow that you could see. You could see the efforts, the rewards for your efforts, basically. So from there, I actually moved to TNT. I was lucky enough to get a job with TNT Logistics in Australia. Again, that was in commercial roles. So again, the numbers side of the house. They kind of got bought out. They became Seva Logistics globally, but that was a fantastic learning ground, great company. They were obviously into contract logistics, 3PL warehousing, transport. They did it all. So it was a great place to learn. There, I was lucky to get into one of their sort of premium businesses called Vehicle Logistics, which was just moving all these brand new cars off the wharf to processing centres, then out to dealers. So we got to deal with great customers such as BMW, Porsche, Lamborghini, Ferrari. You could go down to that yard and have a look at all the cars. It was great. So, 3PL probably I'd done that, and I decided that I wanted to get into pure supply chain. An opportunity came up with Kmart here in Australia. That's all owned by part of the Wesfarmers Group. So, big company, lots of stores, huge supply chain. Landed there. That was great as well. I learned so much. Again, big learning curve, learning about international logistics, doing investment cases for new DCs, supply chain transformations, and freight tenders, warehouse tenders, learning about lean in the warehousing as well. And then I came across to one of the other Wesfarmers brands, which was Officeworks, which is based at the Staples of Australia. So they're a pretty big company, market leader in their space, and very mature in the e-commerce space as well. So I've actually been doing same-day delivery for over 9 years. So I've been working with them, doing transformation, continuous improvement, and looking at innovation in supply chain. And then on the side, looking at advisory work with startups and small e-commerce brands as well. So that's what I've been doing for the last sort of 5 or 6 years, and filling in the days and nights.
Wow, it's fascinating, especially just that whole international and just picking it up. I mean, I find a lot of times with supply chain, like worldwide, It really is just the people who kind of find it interesting and have the passion for it, the ones who kind of stick through it and really have the fun experiences with all of it. I see exactly what you're talking about. Like seeing like a product move through is so fun. Like I'm a marketer, right? Most of
Yeah.
the stuff I'm doing is, I mean, I've worked video, I've done that, so I've had that ability to see physical product. Kind of my video got made, great, but like seeing it happen is what kind of
Yeah.
gives me energy too. So it's so fun to kind of hear about that from you.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, and it's what attracted me to logistics. It's what keeps me here as well. There's so much learning to do, and it's the golden age of supply chain at the moment. So we're in it at the right time, I believe.
Oh
So yeah,
yeah. I mean, just the digital transformations that are occurring are fascinating, especially kind of hearing the different ways it's connecting and like
yeah,
just having a seat at the table for this is so much fun. So
yeah. No,
let's talk a
definitely.
little bit about as a Kiwi. I mean, you probably had some fun times coming over to Australia, but
Yeah, for
let's
sure.
talk a little bit about just the quirks of Australian logistics. Because I'll give you the American
Yeah,
picture, right? It's
yeah.
Crocodile Hunter, it's the Outback, it's Melbourne, Sydney, and that's all we really have. So what is it like shipping there? Because I know, like behind the scenes, like a little full disclosure, there's this like YouTube channel
Yeah.
called Scratch where they go golfing all around these interesting places in the world. So I don't know why I want to brag about this on the podcast, but I've seen one where they do the world's longest golf course, where it's that highway in Australia that's the single like highway that's the world's longest one, and the guy just went golfing down that. It took him 4 days, and like he's in the
Yeah.
middle of nowhere. So, like, what is it like working logistics in Australia?
Yeah, look, the distance thing is definitely one of the biggest things you learn when you first come here. Sort of New Zealand, very small country, right? You can drive coast to coast in sort of an hour and a half, 2 hours at most. Whereas here, clearly that's different. So the tyranny of distancing is kind of one of those big things you've got to factor in. Working for national retailers, they obviously have stores, around the country, so not just in the major metropolitan areas. One example that sort of stuck with me when I first came here was for Kmart was shipping product from Melbourne, where I obviously live, to Darwin, which is around about 3,500 kilometers. I think it's about 2,500 miles in equivalent. So that would be like going from Houston to Seattle to deliver stock for a store. So clearly, probably you're not going to do that in USA, but here that kind of is what happens with the distance. So yeah, so distance is a big thing to consider, particularly for placement of stores and the economics of delivering in that as well. Particularly, there's a couple of national carriers such as the Australian Postal Service and a couple of others who really have those deep networks into these regional locations as well. So when you're setting up freight solutions, you've really got to think about not just the metro, but what the costs and the challenges are going to be with that distance. The logistics of freight market over here is kind of set up for it. Some of the things you'll see if you're ever over here and you're up in some of the remote areas, you'll see these things called road trains. I'm sure you've probably seen some photos of them. They're 2 to 3, 4, up to 5 semi trailers all joined together, pulled by one truck in effectively what is a train on the road. And I can tell you get out of their way pretty quick because they don't stop very quickly. So you tend to find a few things like that. We use quite a bit of container freight from here to the western side of Australia, and up into the far north Queensland as well. So delivering container loads of freight to stores. I'm just trying to think some of the other quirks I've seen. Snakes in the warehouse in WA. That was part of the daily stand-up, is to go and do checks around sorters and MHE for snakes.
So I really wasn't
Um,
wrong in the whole crocodile hunter experience. You guys really got to walk in there. I mean, I'm from
yeah,
Florida, so like it's essentially like I understand the quirks of animals, kind of being
yeah.
everywhere. But so you really had to walk the warehouse to clear out the snakes.
Yeah, there was particularly in the summer. So not so much here in Melbourne or Sydney or whatever, but yeah, you go to sort of smaller warehouses in the regional areas. It's definitely something you got to be wary of when you're starting a shift or starting operations as well. So So that was the other thing that, as a Kiwi, I sort of had to get used to. That most of the things over here, from a spider to a simple snake, can kill you. Getting used to just the distance and the travel. There's always the logistics challenges. Supporting remote communities as well is a bit of a challenge. Some of the companies I've worked for obviously do community work as well, and they like to support Indigenous communities who live in very remote areas. And so to deliver what might be some stationery or some food products to them, it can be a 7-day ordeal that might require 2 barges and some air freight just to get it to them as well. Particularly during the rainy season, some of those roads can be impassable, so barges can be the only means of shipping freight to some of those very remote communities. So those are kind of some of the quirks I kind of found when I came to Australia, and you learn to deal with them, and they just sort of become part of the normal operating mode once you get to know them.
What about digital technology, especially that communication? I think it's something that like it still even surprises me of how little here in America there is that communication back and forth with even like major cities. How has it got to be when you're going to remote locations that take 2 barges and 7-day journey? Like, what's communication like? Is it ADI, API, or EDI, API, or was it really like you're picking up the phone and you're hoping like someone's answering?
Yeah, look, one of the challenges with that is also track and trace. So, we enjoy in the city. I can see all the milestones in an Uber style setting of my freight coming to me. So I can see when my order got taken. I can see all the milestones that come through. When you start going to remote areas, you start losing that visibility of the freight, and you start losing those milestones because the carrier may be a small operator who's still operating on paper con notes. So to get those visibility and updates back requires someone to scan something in or someone to key some data back at a depot in a major location. So you can get a real delay in that visibility in the supply chain the further you go out of those major metro areas. So that becomes a bit of a challenge. Also, monitoring of fleets and stuff like that becomes a challenge because you get some dropout areas. Clearly, with the advancement in satellite technology, GPS, there's been a lot of good work around safety in trucking in Australia as well. So those visibility gaps and those communication gaps are starting to really sort of close up, with technology. So, which has been great.
What about education? It's sort of something that I'm finding interesting here is just how the universities and the schooling's trying to educate the supply chain. And especially I've kind of from what I've heard, a lot of the kids coming up nowadays just don't even get it. Like what's education like in the supply chain down there? Because I mean your journey sounds
Yeah.
fascinating, but are you finding interest? Are you having like we have a plenty of aging workforce. We have a lot of those quirks. I mean that I think most are getting, but are you guys experiencing that too?
Yeah, look, it has been a problem. Labor, quality of labor in Australia is the same challenge you face in America. Particularly the type of labor that we kind of need for the smart supply chain is different to the labor we probably needed 5 years ago. So, people coming out of university with data science degrees have been snapped up by the shiny new startups and the big tech companies. We need those same people. We are a little bit lucky. We're actually just doing a little bit of work with one of the universities at the moment, Swinburne. They actually have a supply chain master's program where they do focus on innovation, and we've just partnered with them to actually bring some of their master's students in to do some lean programs within our e-commerce warehouse. So they're getting hands-on experience. I think, probably during COVID, it really kind of brought supply chain to light. So we're sort of all hoping that people are taking a second look at logistics. You could sort of see it in the corporate world. It was trucks and sheds. It was a cost on the P&L. Now I think people see the value that supply chains add through, things like COVID as well. So I think, hopefully that's going to attract more talent to supply chain within Australia. Yeah.
I never even thought of that, but that's a fascinating point of like you kind of see that, right? Someone can kind of
Yeah,
see like, hey man, I saw the no toilet
yeah,
paper and the kind of the panic of that stuff. And if I could join that, you kind of have that little nice feeling to it. I never even thought about that, but that's a
yeah.
great thought. So were you hearing that with that master's class where they kind of, was there a little more energy kind of coming back? But now you guys are back on lockdown. So it's probably like, great. This is fantastic. Are you
Yeah,
hearing
look,
anything?
yeah, and we get a lot of international students here as well. So, even having supply chain masters now offered, with innovation, just really sets a whole new standard for, what some of those students are doing. I think the key though is for those students to, get that real world opportunity to go and have a look at live operations and bridge the gap between academia and operations. So we're really thankful that Swinburne sort of reached out to us, Swinburne University, and we're going to do whatever we can to make that help to make that program successful. So yeah, should be good.
What about the carrier market? I know here we're kind of made up of like, especially in truckload, it's mainly it's a lot of small size owners. I mean, even though they have some of those big logistics companies, it really is owner operators kind of working with seven or less trucks. Is that sort of the same, or how's that work? I mean, it's got to sound interesting.
Yeah, look, it is. We have there's some really big players here who dominate a lot of the space with particular big retailers and the bulk shipping, but they tend to not really have their own. So they're sort of asset light. So they tend to use subcontract models. So yeah, the bulk of the trucks are actually owned by small operators who are in that sort of one truck to sort of seven truck kind of category. But they tend to subcontract to the big companies, right? So on any given day, while you might have say 20 trucks at a dock, while they all have the same livery of say a large trucking company, say as Toll, they're probably all independent subcontractors to that brand. So it is made up of a lot of little trucking companies. In my career, we've tended to try and support those companies as well. They're typically, best in class on their given lane. While the big end of town can, be great with all the technology and systems, sometimes, the smaller end of town, the guy and gal that owns the trucking company, they can get the job done, and at a reasonable, fair rate as well. So no, a lot a lot of contractors in the market. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm envisioning that. That's probably even like the better one, especially when you go into those little more remote areas. Like having the small owner operator that knows their lane and knows
Yeah.
everyone in that town probably is huge. Like the service level you probably get from that compared to like the major guys, probably like you might pay a little bit more, but you're paying because they truly know everyone in that area.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And a sort of a funny quirk again of that is there's a couple of areas within Australia. If you say put out a freight tender with all the big carriers, you'll get back pretty much the same price. And when you sort of work out who's their actual subcontractor, it's the same person who would subcontract all of them. And I've seen a subcontractor once. He in his truck he had the TNT con notes, the FedEx con notes, the UPS con notes, the DHL con notes, the Toll con notes, and the Australia Post con notes, right? So he was the only game in town, so he had the market on lockdown. But yeah, pretty remote. So
That's man, yeah. I'm pretty sure
yeah,
that that exists here too. Where you, especially getting
yeah,
like the little more like a place like Wyoming or Montana, like the states that are just
yeah,
kind of like a little more remote. It's probably the same thing, but that's hilarious.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
what about infrastructure? I know like I'm still kind of hitting on this a little bit, but
Yep.
what you sort of talk about the wet seasons and stuff like that, and then the satellites probably help a little bit. But is there any kind of quirks to that? I mean, like here we've got so many different kind of weather that you have to look out for and different seasons and what to watch out for. Like what's some of the interesting seasons that you run into in Australia?
Yeah, look, we probably don't have like the storms and the hurricanes that you guys over there have over there. It's probably more the wet seasons up in the far north of Queensland and up in the top end. During my time sort of looking after transport for that, every season the rail would go out 2 or 3 times, and so rail would be backed up for 2 or 3 days. And even going by road, sometimes not an option. And of course, the market rate for road freight goes through the roof. So having good buffer stocks at stores, not going too lean with inventories at your remote stores is really kind of important. And just planning for them, right? Like, they come around every year. We know that the rail's going to be out 2 or 3 times potentially. We know it's going to be out for 3 or 4 days at a stretch. And, getting in early, building buffer stocks in retail, and having alternative road carriers for the stuff you really need. I think there can sometimes be a knee-jerk reaction within the freight industry to go to road straight away and pay exorbitant prices and ship product that's potentially just going to sit in the back dock of the store. So be really selective about the stock that you want to send. So the weather probably more is the rainy season. Heat is a factor with the trucking industry as well. Some of the extreme heats, pretty hard on the equipment and the drivers as well. So managing things like fatigue and the drivers is really important with the long driving hours. So there's some new laws that come in around that, and some good technology to help monitor them as well. So that's kind of some of the things that they deal with in the industry for sure.
What's something that what's a quirk, especially, I mean, given that you aren't native to Australia, you came from New Zealand. What's something that you kind of found, what was the thing that you found most interesting when you first kind of moved there? And then now what do you find most interesting when you have more experience?
I just couldn't get over the use of the road trains and stuff like that, because that was pretty impressive to be hauling 4 to 5 trailers in one go. You obviously wouldn't see that in New Zealand. Maybe you see it in I don't know, in America somewhere. And that will be really interesting as well once autonomous vehicles come in, because it will platooning and stuff like that will be even more impressive. So
Yeah, that's the only time I've
just,
ever heard of it, really, was like in the autonomous vehicles of like road training, where like you got 3 vehicles that are just cruising down the highway. But I've never seen 5. I would be scared to death, like you said.
there's some, if you Google it, right? If you Google Australian road train, you'll see some pretty impressive pictures. There's even the fuel trucks, BP, the fuel trucks. I saw one just recently that's got, five trailers, 4 or 5 trailers. And I'm like, wow, so there's those things, which, sort of uniquely Australian, which I haven't seen anywhere else in my travels around the world. So, so that's kind of the main thing.
Now, let's start to transition over into the elephant in the room, right? COVID,
Yeah.
and sort of the Australian response to it. Now, I spoke recently with Andrew Clark, the logistics linchpin down in Australia, and he kind of was sort of talking these like we had some effects. It hit us a little bit, but it really wasn't like our supply chain was really good. And then he's like, a lot of like the no contact stuff we'd already been doing, so it really wasn't that big of a deal. What was your experience with COVID? How did it hit? What was it like? Where did you guys, like, you're in the midst of a second shutdown? So what is this kind of like? What's going on in Australia?
Yeah, so the first wave, again, it caught everyone sort of off guard, right? So, there was no playbook for it. Everyone was making up as they went. Look, obviously, some retailers had a boom, right? And then some, sort of went bust. Luckily, I was on that sort of side of the equation where it was a boom. Retailers were having, record sales days, bigger than their Christmas, and for prolonged periods as well, which provided its own set of challenges. What I sort of saw was the retailers that had the mature e-commerce offerings tended to sort of win. They had already had the infrastructure, be it the web infrastructure or the warehouse or the freight infrastructure, to basically win on offers with customers. I think the other thing I saw was the retailers who had control of their supply chain, so had a more integrated supply chain, tended to sort of fare better than the people who had probably outsourced some of their stuff as well. The thing we saw internally in a lot of the businesses is teams became very agile through COVID. And that's not just the supply chain teams through to, that's like sales and marketing as well. Projects that might have, taken 3 to 4 months to get off the ground and to execute were taking, days, if, maybe weeks at worst, right? So I think, that was something that as teams, we all sort of took on board, that we could be a little more agile with the way we thought about, implementing supply chain changes and solutions. The other one I saw was a lot of businesses, pivoting either to e-commerce or to alternative products. The cloud today, you can spin up a Shopify site, in less than 24 hours. You can get payment systems up and running. You can go on eBay. A lot of smart businesses pivoted to e-com pretty quickly. They weren't already in it. And just watching some of those businesses pivot to alternative products and offerings. I saw one coffee company, who had a lot of cafes. They basically went out and hired some vans and started doing deliveries. So they turned themselves into a coffee logistics company literally overnight to keep their staff employed. So baristas were going from sort of making coffees in their cool cafe to driving vans and delivering, coffee that people have purchased online.
And misspelling people's names and everything.
Oh,
Still,
yeah.
even then.
Yeah, that's probably the in joke on the con note. So, in the big end of town, like, the airlines got hit. I saw DHL. DHL had a contract with Qantas to do some of their in-flight services. They pivoted pretty quickly to picking grocery orders for one of the grocery providers. And the other one that really sort of stuck out was the paddock to plate stuff. I saw a lot of that. So, organic farms who had a small e-commerce offering, that just took off. People in Australia, when the panic buying happened in the grocery section, started looking for alternative products. And so a lot of those paddock to plate kind of organic, players, really took off. So that was really, really interesting. Our two biggest grocery providers as well, so Coles and Woolworths, ended up working together. Normally arch enemies in the great fight for the retail dollar. When things got really bad with stock, they ended up actually working together to solve some of those problems, which I thought was really interesting. Creating pop-up DCs, saw a lot of that happening as well. We obviously moved to the contactless click and collect as well. That was pretty quick for most of the big retailers. Probably what we saw also was the buffer. People had buffers in supply chain, so weren't running too lean and mean, were able to survive a bit longer. Retailers and other people who relied on that constant flow of container stock coming out of China, that dried up pretty quickly. Whereas people who had local warehousing or local suppliers with warehouses full of stock were able to keep their sales cycle going a lot longer, when that sort of huge retail rush was coming through. So those were kind of some of the key things I sort of saw. Apart from the obvious stuff, right? We all had the panic buying of toilet paper, people trying to, sell hand sanitizer for $50 a bottle on eBay and whatnot. So, so those were kind of some of the things that I saw happening in the industry at the time.
So one thing that's it's gaining momentum here, but it's also sort of annoying because it's like you can't do that. But it's that whole nearshore, bringing more of the manufacturing in house, and like you said, people that had the bumper stock and that really weren't offshore as much. So we're seeing success. Is that kind of movement spreading a little bit amongst Australia too, or what's it's sort of, if you should have already been thinking bumper stock because of wet season, because of just some of the quirks of Australia.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, probably fortunate some retailers, were coming out of Christmas, are probably holding that excess stock they were going to discount through. So we're probably a little bit lucky. I think there is a movement to that. People are rethinking the risk element of their supply chains. Should they have all their eggs in one basket? There has been there's been a slow move that we've seen to sort of having, warehousing or manufacturing located in China and Vietnam. So Vietnam is really on Australia's radar as a place to warehouse or manufacture as well. We've seen that move was happening pre-COVID though. So, look, manufacturing in Australia, probably at the end of the day, our wage costs are very high here. So we've got to be manufacturing stuff that's high value, high margin. We can't be manufacturing, $5 t-shirts and plastic tubs. It would just never work here unless there's a significant change in the consumer, way of buying that type of product. So, look, I think there will be. It wasn't the knee-jerk reaction that we all sort of thought might happen. So it's been pretty reasonable. Sitting behind that is the trade tensions with China that obviously both the US and Australia have. So some of that sort of playing out in the diversification part as well. So so I don't think there's going to be a massive shift of manufacturing all the way back to Australia. I just think it may be spread between some different different players within the Asian market for Australia. Yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds a lot like kind of what we're dealing with. It's not full on panic, bring everything near shore, like that type of stuff. It's you should be diversifying. You should be understanding. And I was reading a whole thing on by the Harvard Business Review about stress testing. Like this is the perfect time to be stress testing everything and trying to figure out where it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So e-commerce, you speak to like the companies that had a robust e-commerce were really making it. What was e-commerce like in Australia prior to COVID?
Look, it was on the rise. We're to be fair, we tend to be a bit behind the rest of the world in some of this stuff. So I was fortunate, the company I work for at the moment is, really mature e-commerce platforms and offering. You've been doing same day for over 9 years. Some of the big retailers have only just sort of spun up their e-commerce offers. So, so they probably weren't well placed to deal with that during COVID. We have a couple of pure play e-commerce providers over here as well, Catch of the Day and Kogan, and again they were well placed. They had the ability to scale up. They had the network and infrastructure already in place. Really the only thing that could hold some of those e-commerce retailers back was really just the stock situation. Could they get hold of the stock to sell online? So, I think some of the smaller retailers as well, just having access to, cloud-based solutions that you can put a credit card in and, like within 24 hours, you've got a working, e-commerce site. I think that was really interesting as well. Had COVID been 10 years ago, that option wouldn't have been open to them. So that's been interesting to see. Obviously, you put a massive strain on the freight system. So I did see, a lot of the bigger freight companies starting to dial back the service guarantees, and then the surcharges started to come in as well, just to try and try and bring that in line. But e-commerce was on the rise. I think this has happened all around the world. It's just brought forward a lot of plans around e-commerce. It appears, COVID's going to be with us a long time. We could go through multiple lockdowns. The second lockdown that we went through, we saw in Victoria, we saw another sort of sales spike as well as everyone went back into that lockdown. So if we're going to go through 3, 4 more of these, and you can't open your physical retail store, you're going to have e-commerce capability. So,
what was Aussie, was it already sort of in the same kind of, were the buyers in the same mode as we are, right? That kind of 1-day shipping is sort of becoming the new norm. That's what everyone expects. They don't expect to be waiting. I know the one tricky thing, especially here, was just all of a sudden that sort of was gone. Like you're saying, it just was difficult to fulfill this rate, especially when everyone's stuck at home bored. But I think that the idea of customer service became really big here, especially because if you could at least communicate what was happening, people understood. Yeah, it stinks. I can't get my kettlebell or like my pellet, like my bike here right away, but I understand. It's not like I'm unique in this scenario. Were you kind of, was that sort of the attitude, or what was the attitude of Australian consumers prior to COVID? And then have you seen like a change with that at all?
Yeah, look, I think when we realized we're going to lockdown, I think what consumers wanted was probably just certainty. When they ordered something, they wanted to know you had it actually had it in stock, and it was going to be delivered within a reasonable time frame. So I think the same day offers and the sort of next day offers weren't as critical. It became about who could guarantee that delivery. And and the retailers and e-commerce providers that did that really well and gave their customers visibility, probably did the best. I know some, struggled, where they don't really have some of that visibility. So obviously they took a lot of phone calls and they had to ramp up their customer service, which is an additional overhead on top of what they're already dealing with. So certainty of supply, and just being honest with customers, I think is really important. If it's going to be 3 days, let them know it's 3 days. As long as they know they're going to get it and it's going to come, the product they brought and it's going to be, damage free. They'll be okay with that as long as you communicate with the customer. Where people don't communicate, Aussies love to get on social media like Facebook and really take the retailer or the e-commerce provider to task, right? So there was a bit of that happening. Which was probably the same all around the world, right? Like people just want to know when they're going to get their stuff.
But they don't want to be scammed. I mean, at the end of the day, they're just petrified they got scammed. It's online. They didn't get to see it in person. It's that kind
Yeah,
of like, I don't know if this is real. I've watched the news where someone's granny got scammed for a thousand
yeah,
dollars or something. So I think
yeah,
the last thing I want to talk about before we kind of go into the innovation part, because I think that's gonna be fascinating, just with your experience with the university, is you're hitting that second lockdown. What's been the attitude? What have you seen? I mean, you sort of said it a little bit, but like, are you seeing spurred like everyone kind of doing that? Like, I need to bulk up because I remember what the first lockdown was like. Because I remember here it was like, why is everyone buying toilet paper? It was kind of the main joke.
yeah.
But now that people have gone through it, is it a more sophisticated customer or is it still kind of panic mode?
Look, initially, the panic buying came back. Obviously, not to the level that it was the first time. So yeah, we as we went into that lockdown, supermarkets got a bit of a rush. Anyone that was selling home office products, right? They really have done well. So if you're selling, like chairs and tables and anything for that home office, orders went through the roof again. So as people realized that they were going to be in another 6 weeks worth of lockdown, they weren't going to be able to make it back to the office. And maybe they've been, sort of surviving with a substandard, laptop on the knees on the sofa, and they weren't going to do that again. So the panic buying wasn't as bad. Some of the stores, are still open. You can go there, you can do a click and collect where they'll bring it out to your car so you don't have to go in. There was a bit more enforcing of social distancing within the stores, and police were actually going around to some of the big retailers to make sure that was happening. It was a little bit at the start. It's calmed down now. I think people sort of know the supply chain's going to keep up. I'll eventually get the printer that I ordered, or I'll get the toilet paper that I ordered. So it's not as bad the second time round. Yeah.
That's good. And I know I said the last one, but it's something that's interesting me because you say paddock to table, which is over here we call it farm to table, but it is that we've seen that sort of rise too. How's that happening within the second lockdown? Are the people is it still able to meet the fulfillment needs, or are they kind of now like kind of oh we're running into the second round?
Yeah, look, I think I spoke to a couple of them. They had that initial wave of orders, that first time customer who hasn't come back. So, a lot of them can now track through their Google Analytics or Shopify Analytics who those customers are who are repeat business. So, in the first lockdown, they just had massive amounts of new customers signing up to the point where some of them even turned off the sign up on the website because they just couldn't supply. So look, a lot of them still are doing really, really well. The ones that I've talked to, they've retained, maybe 20% of that customer base that originally signed up from the new customer. So again, they're coping okay. Again, it's kind of the freight thing that is the hard bit for them. So, if you're a organic beef farmer in Byron Bay, New South Wales, you want to ship to, you want to ship down to Melbourne, you're getting in the queue with every other e-commerce provider in Sydney and Brisbane who's trying to ship freight down there as well. So, particularly where you got perishable products, time becomes an issue, right? It can't be hanging around in DCs or on, even if it's a refrigerated freight or ambient temperature warehouses. You kind of got to get it to the customer, particularly the meat providers and that as well. So that's still a bit of a challenge for them. It's probably not so much keeping up with the order level. It's, getting it in the freight network and getting it to the customer in a reasonable time frame has been the challenge, yeah.
I gotta find it. I mean, I gotta find a way to talk to those guys because I think it's just fascinating of like how, because it is a techie kind of feel, right? This whole like
Yeah.
farm to plate or paddock to plate. But
Yeah.
you're like, how'd you learn the supply chain? How'd you figure this out like in a timely manner? Because you're dealing with one of the most complicated, hard to move like products
Yeah.
within the entire supply chain. And like you guys figured out how to do it individually. Like it's a meal
Yeah, no,
service.
it's
It's
quite
one of those,
impressive.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like when you
Yeah,
think
no, I
about
was
it, like,
really interested with it.
yeah.
I actually ordered some organic beef because I couldn't get any beef in the supermarket, and it was some from an organic supplier in Byron Bay. And yeah, they cryo pack it. It comes down. I mean, that's a 2 or 3 day journey for that to get there. And it was in pristine condition. It was, I could track and trace it all the way. They have better track and trace than some of the big, big,
You're an
e-commerce
organic beef
providers.
farm. How are you able to do this? Like, I
Yeah,
know
no,
large
yeah.
retailers that can't pull this off.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes they're in a better place. They're not encumbered by legacy systems. They can sign up for the latest and greatest cloud system. And if that one doesn't work, they can go somewhere else or get the latest update. So yeah, I've been quite impressed with the way some of these paddock to plate or farm to plate providers can actually use technology to service the customer for sure.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. I know we're kind of running late on time
Yeah,
because
that's
it's
good.
late for you. It's early for
Yeah,
me. We
that's
both got
fine.
things to do. But let's talk a little bit about the innovation because I think it is something that's fascinating. What are you seeing? Kind of what's the place? What's the word I'm trying to look for? Like what's the biggest opportunity, or where are you seeing the most innovation occurring in Australia when it comes to supply chain?
There's a couple of areas. I mean, there's the obvious innovation around automation, and I'm referring specifically to robotics. So a lot of the big grocery retailers have obviously been looking towards automation and robotics for a while. That's really just it's kicked into another gear. So typically the rest of the retail market follows the grocery market. They sort of have the have the lead in that. So we've seen the rise of the AMR, the Kiva Amazon style robot. Um, Recently, Kogan, who are a big e-commerce provider, just launched their AMR robotics. So that sort of seems to be coming into Australia quite quickly. I've seen a lot of the smaller e-commerce warehouse startups start to pop up. So these are sort of specialist, more sort of new age, warehouse e-commerce fulfillment that just focus on that side. And what I've noticed is a lot of them are starting to build their own front end. So they're not sort of, picking a classic WMS from a Gartner quadrant and, paying $500,000 to have it installed and implemented. They're actually developing their own technology in-house, so it's fully customizable for their service offering and for their customers. So that's something I've seen coming in. There's a lot more venture capital funding flowing in within the Australia VC network as well. So I've seen a lot of that. The e-commerce side, some of the bigger companies, such as Australia Post, are creating sub-brands as well to cater for that e-commerce side. There's a company called Fulfilio that's just part of Australia Post, but they're really taking that business and niching it down for the e-commerce customer that they would service. There's some freight innovation, some really cool things I've seen just recently. One of my ex-colleagues is involved with a company called Matchbox, and they do container matching. So empty containers that come into a warehouse can be matched with a warehouse nearby, so that they avoid the duplication of freight charges within that network, which has been really, really interesting to see. So there's a bit starting to happen in the freight space around innovation. I think, I've seen a bit of the crowdsourcing delivery start to come into Australia. There's a company that I've talked to before called Parcel. They're starting to use shoppers as delivery. So people who are out shopping nearby a store with you, they're trialing that shopping person picking up and delivering to you as well. So we start to see some of that crowdsourcing really come into the market as well. I think the other thing that happened in the market, without going back to COVID again, was the last mile delivery logistics for food delivery got a bit of a shake up. I think during this time there was a couple of Australian startups who really came to the fore because there was a bit of a backlash around the fees that Uber and Deliveroo were charging at the time for those food retailers. So that really opened the door for local startups to do that last mile food delivery as well. So those are kind of some of the things that I'm seeing. Obviously, we're lucky, with what I'm doing. I get to, I'm working with Swinburne on their supply chain innovation program. So that stuff's all starting to come through. Like I said, we tend to be a little bit behind the rest of the market. A lot of work, though, has been done by companies to go overseas, the likes of US and China, and places like Singapore, to see what's really going on and bringing some of those innovations back. So yeah, so there's a bit happening down here. It's been a bit slow, but it's starting to take off. Yeah.
The thing that's fascinating to me, especially, is, like you said, the small to mid-sized enterprises that are able to get, because they're not tied down to legacy products, they're able to kind of innovate and get these newer applications sooner. Do you see a sharing of that information, or how is it really just like company A figured out how they can make this work so they can ship dairy products faster, and then company B is learning how to work with retailer? Like, are they sharing this information, or is it all kind of like, what works for me, and that's it?
Yeah, no, look, I've seen a bit of share. I think the startups in that e-commerce fulfillment space tend to share, with others in that space. It's a bit like the startup kind of clique, or cohort, where they're all sort of in it together. They're all sort of bootstrapping their way up in business. So I tend to see that they're probably a little more open to sharing and assisting, where obviously at the big end of town, it's a very closed shop around, commercial strategies and, IP and stuff like that. So, so you see a bit of sharing going on, but yeah, look, a lot of the products that they're developing are for their own use. I have seen a couple of companies where they've started out sort of building the software for their business and realized they're probably a better place to be a software company than a logistics company. So I've seen one of those, and they've got a great product that's both a WMS and a TMS. It's built here in Australia on the cloud. So, so I've seen a few of those sort of popping up around Australia at the moment as well. So, and not to forget the Kiwis over the ditch in New Zealand. They've got some interesting things happening over there. Came across interesting one. There's a company called Freight Fish over there. They're doing a hydrofoil container ship. Yeah, and I was like, wow, that's just, out of this planet. So, so there's some interesting things happening down here.
What's something that you think is ripe for innovation right now in Australia that you're just like, man, why is no one seizing this opportunity? Because I think here, like as you think about it, like here right now, it's really the data piece of stuff. Like you find a lot of like carriers, logistics companies, even 3PLs, they don't have a good grasp of their data. And if you can kind of help people understand that, if you can bring insight-driven analytics to their to their fingertips, it's a game changer. But is there something that you're seeing that like, man, if only someone would just grab that opportunity right now, it'd be huge.
Yeah, look, it's probably for us, it's that last mile delivery, right? Like we see a lot of it. If you go to any supply chain conferences, there's a lot of control from the branding and marketing of a product through customer acquisition to getting them all the way through to controlling the warehouse, the stock, the picking, and then kind of all that good work can fall apart in that last mile delivery. So what our market's really screaming out for is a provider that can really grab that space and just own it and run with it and deliver that level of service that I think people are craving. In saying that, I think people are going to get realistic in Australia about if you want that level of service, you've got to pay for it. I think, the freight market here had been a bit of a race to the bottom for a long time. So, some pretty low sort of drop rates and rates out there. So I think that's also probably something that needs to be addressed. If we want quality service, we've probably got to look at investing in the drivers, the freight mechanisms, and the technology that supports them as well. So, I think the freight system's a bit fractured over here as well. Getting to some common platforms, utilizing technology, such as APIs and stuff like that. There's a couple of startups that are looking at things like that, trying to bring a lot of the freight data into one sort of market so that it can be utilized for all and find all the inefficiencies and opportunities in there. I think if one player could sort of start to bring together that kind of common data, I think there'd be some massive opportunities there as well, to remove a lot of the underutilization within the networks and a lot of those inefficiencies.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we kind of we sort of hoped COVID would help out a little bit. It did. It took some inefficiencies out of the marketplace. I mean, a lot of it was the contact and stuff like that. You're like, why is this a thing? But there's definitely still inefficiencies even here we're seeing. But it's honestly fascinating. And Richard, I can't thank you enough for the time you've given me, and I really appreciate it. We definitely are going to have more conversations because this was probably the easiest conversation I've ever had to have. I'm fascinated. I've got like a million questions in the back of my head. So what's the best way, as we kind of wrap up, what's the best way that if the audience is someone listening or watching wants to get in contact with you, how do they reach out to you?
I'm on LinkedIn, so that's probably the easiest way. If you look for me on LinkedIn, Richard Duncan, you'll see me there. Just reach out on LinkedIn. Obviously, connect or send me a message. Always up for a chat or to have a look at things that people want me to look at. So reach out on there.
And legit, at any time you're up for that chat, because it has blown my mind the times you've reached back to me the email. I'm like, what time is it where he's responding right now? But I'll include the link to your LinkedIn in my show notes too. So anyone listening right now can just go down there and find you. But Richard, thanks so much for your time today. This was an awesome conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I hope listeners get something out of it.
Absolutely. All right. Have a great day.
Yeah. Thanks, Carl. See you later. Have a good one.
See ya. And that's our show. Have a question for Richard? Ask it in the comments section and we'll be sure to get an answer. In the meantime, subscribe and share our show. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I'm Kyle MacNaught. Rock and roll.